The Zitherian Empire was vast, powerful, and feared across the galaxy. Its ruler, King Vorax, was known for his strength and ruthless leadership. But despite his victories, he carried a shame that no one dared to speak of. His daughter, Princess Kaylee, was weak. In Zitherian culture, strength was everything. The strongest ruled, the weakest perished. But Kaylee was different. She was frail, timid, and lacked the warrior's spirit that defined her people. She had never won a single duel, never commanded a battalion, and never shown the cold, ruthless power expected of a future queen. The court whispered about her behind closed doors, a disgrace to the royal bloodline. Unfit to rule, the king's greatest failure. Vorax heard it all, and though he never spoke of it, the shame burned inside him. Finally, he made a decision. If his daughter could not become strong on her own, she would be forced to learn. One evening, Kaylee was summoned to the throne room. She arrived in silence, her violet eyes filled with unease. Her father sat upon his golden throne, his piercing gaze locked on her. The room was filled with the Empire's highest-ranking nobles, all watching, judging. A human stood before the king. Kaylee's breath caught in her throat. A human. Here, humans were considered inferior, weak creatures that barely survived their own wars. They were nothing compared to the Zitherians. So why had her father brought one here? "This is Adrian Voss," King Vorax announced, his deep voice echoing across the hall. "A human warrior, a survivor. From this day forward, he will be your personal trainer." Kaylee's heart pounded. A human, training her. It was an insult. "Father, this is unnecessary," she spoke, keeping her tone calm. "I do not need a human toe." "You need strength," Vorax interrupted sharply. "You have failed me for the last time. If you cannot prove yourself, you will lose your place as heir. You will be nothing." The words cut deeper than any blade. Kaylee clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on her. She turned to the human, studying him. Adrian Voss stood tall, his posture unshaken despite being surrounded by warriors who could break him in an instant. His dark eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw something unusual in them. Not fear, not submission, but curiosity. "You don't look like a warrior," she said, trying to mask her frustration. "And you don't look like a princess," Adrian replied calmly. Gasps filled the hall. No one spoke to a royal like that. Kaylee's eyes widened in shock. Did he just insult me? But her father only smirked. "Then it seems you will learn from each other," Vorax said. Kaylee knew, at that moment, that her life was about to change forever. Kaylee stormed out of the throne room, her mind spinning with frustration. A human was supposed to train her. It was humiliating. She had spent years trying to earn her father's respect, and now he had handed her over to a lesser creature. Behind her, Adrian followed, his footsteps calm and steady. "You walk like a soldier," he said casually, "but you move like someone afraid of battle." Kaylee stopped, her anger flaring. She turned sharply. "And you talk like someone who doesn't understand his place." Adrian simply smiled. "I understand my place just fine. I'm here to make you strong, whether you like it or not." Kaylee's sharp nails dug into her palm. This human is either brave or incredibly foolish. The next morning, training began. They stood in the royal courtyard, where warriors usually trained in combat. The sun burned red in the Zitherian sky, as Adrian observed Kaylee with quiet focus. She stood before him, arms crossed, expecting him to hand her a weapon. Instead, he just watched her. "What now?" she asked, irritated. "Show me how you fight." Kaylee smirked. "Fine." She picked up a Zitherian blade, a weapon heavier than any human could hope to lift, and lunged at him. She expected him to dodge, maybe even beg for mercy. Instead, he simply stepped to the side. Kaylee swung again. Missed. She snarled and attacked harder, faster. But every time, Adrian moved out of reach just in time, as if he already knew what she would do. Finally, exhausted and breathing hard, Kaylee stepped back, glaring at him. "Not bad," Adrian said, "but you rely too much on brute force. You're strong, but you're not fast. You think strength wins fights. No, speed, strategy, precision. That's how you win." Kaylee's pride burned. She had never trained like this before. Zetharians were taught to overpower their enemies, to break them with raw strength. This human, however, was playing with her like he was testing her limits. She hated it. "I am Zetharian," she hissed. "We do not fight like weaklings." Adrian chuckled. "You mean you don't fight smart?" Kelly's fists clenched, but deep down, something about his words made sense. The days passed. Adrian continued to push her, making her dodge instead of attack, move instead of strike. He taught her how to predict movements, how to conserve energy, how to think beyond just brute strength. At first, Kaylee resisted. But slowly, she started to see the difference. She was lasting longer in training, her body adapting to a new way of fighting. Still, something inside her refused to accept it fully. Until one night, when assassins came for her, and everything Adrian had taught her would be put to the test. Kaylee lay in her bed, the quiet hum of the palace filling the night air. She had finally begun to accept the strange human methods Adrian taught her. For the first time in years, she felt her body shifting, changing, but doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. Was she really strong enough to become the warrior her father wanted? Suddenly, a noise echoed through the halls. Footsteps, too light to be normal guards. Then the sound of a window shattering. Kelly's heart skipped. Assassins. Her instincts kicked in, and she jumped from the bed, grabbing the nearest weapon, a small dagger. But then she stopped, looking at the blade in her hand. Not the right weapon. She didn't need to cut. She needed to survive. She rushed to the door, opening it carefully, only to see Adrian standing in the hallway, calm and steady as always. "They're here," she said, her voice sharp. Adrian nodded. "I've been expecting them." "Expecting them?" Kaylee almost snapped. "Why didn't you tell me?" "We're not in the palace anymore," he said, his tone unreadable. "It's time to see if you've learned." Before Kelly could respond, the first assassin appeared, his face covered in dark armor. He lunged toward her, weapon drawn, but Kelly's new instincts kicked in. She dodged, rolling out of the way in a way she'd never been able to before. Adrian's voice echoed behind her. "Use your speed, Kelly. Don't fight him head-on." Kaylee gritted her teeth and moved again, faster this time. She grabbed a chair, throwing it into the path of the assassin's next strike. The man was knocked off balance, just long enough for Kelly to disarm him and land a solid blow to his throat. He crumpled, unconscious. Kaylee stood over him, panting. "I did it." But the moment of victory was short-lived. Another assassin appeared, this one faster and stronger than the first. Kaylee barely had time to react before the assassin slashed at her with his blade. She stepped back, her heart pounding. The fight was different now, more dangerous. But Kaylee didn't panic. She remembered what Adrian had taught her. Think, Kelly. Move. Predict. She ducked just in time, feeling the blade sweep over her head. Then, in one smooth motion, she spun around, using the assassin's momentum against him. She grabbed his arm, twisted it, and sent him crashing to the ground. Adrian appeared beside her, nodding with approval. "Not bad. But don't let your guard down." Kaylee wiped the sweat from her forehead, her mind racing. The adrenaline still buzzed through her veins, but now she realized something. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. The training Adrian had put her through had worked. She was no longer the weak, helpless princess. She was becoming the warrior her father had always wanted. But the battle wasn't over yet. The final assassin entered the room. A towering figure, wearing dark armor adorned with strange markings. This was no ordinary threat. Kaylee raised her head, eyes focused. It's time to show them what I've learned. The final assassin towered over Kaylee, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the room. His armor glinted in the dim light, and his eyes gleamed with cold determination. Kaylee's pulse quickened. This would be her true test. Everything she had learned, everything she had endured, would come down to this moment. Adrian stood behind her, his voice calm but urgent. You've got this. Trust yourself. Kaylee took a deep breath. Her hands were steady now. She had faced danger before, but never like this. The assassin before her was not just an opponent. He was the kind of fighter she had feared, the kind that made her feel small, weak, and out of place. But not anymore. She had spent weeks learning to move, to think, and to fight differently. She had learned how to feel her opponent's movements, how to outsmart them, how to use the environment. Her father's expectations had always been about power, but Adrian's training had shown her there was more to being a warrior than just strength. It was about strategy. The assassin lunged at her, his blade slicing through the air. Kaylee twisted to the side, feeling the rush of wind as the blade narrowly missed her. She could almost sense the assassin's next move before it happened. He's going to strike again. Kaylee dropped low, just as the assassin's blade came crashing down. She ducked beneath it, her body flowing into a roll, narrowly avoiding his next attack. She could feel his breath on her neck, the weight of his anger pushing her into a corner. But she didn't panic. Adrian's words echoed in her mind. Use your speed, Kaylee. Your agility is your strength. She wasn't going to overpower him, but she could outsmart him. Kaylee darted to the side, leading the assassin into a corner where the room narrowed. The walls were close together, leaving him little space to maneuver. Perfect. She grabbed a nearby vase, hurling it at his face to distract him for a moment. He swung wildly, and in that split second, Kaylee launched herself at his exposed side. Her hands found his wrist, twisting it with a force she never thought she could muster. The assassin stumbled, his blade falling from his hand. Kaylee took the opportunity, slamming her elbow into his chest and sending him crashing to the ground. The assassin groaned, trying to push himself up, but Kaylee stood over him, her breath heavy but controlled. She was calm now, clear-headed, knowing exactly what to do. Adrian stepped forward, nodding with approval. You did it. Kaylee exhaled slowly, her mind still racing, but the weight of the moment settled over her. She had won, not just the fight, but something much deeper. She had conquered her fear. She looked down at the assassin, who lay at her feet, defeated. This wasn't the Kaylee who had once cowered in the palace, the one who had believed she wasn't strong enough. This was a new Kaylee, a warrior. I'm ready, she whispered to Adrian, her voice steady now. Ready to lead, ready to fight. Adrian gave her a smile that held both pride and quiet respect. I knew you would be. Kaylee turned to face the door, knowing this was just the beginning. She had taken the first step into a world where she could shape her own destiny. No longer the weak princess, but a true warrior and the future ruler of the Zitharian Empire. The days after the battle felt surreal to Kaylee. The palace was buzzing with whispers of her victory, how the weak princess had defeated the assassin and saved herself from certain death. But Kaylee felt the weight of the new expectations on her shoulders. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. She had proven she could fight, but could she lead? Adrian had trained her, pushed her beyond limits she never thought possible, but now the question remained, was she truly ready for the challenges ahead? She sat alone in her chambers one evening, staring at the ancient blade her father had gifted her long ago, a symbol of her royal bloodline. The weight of it felt different now. She had grown stronger, but the doubt still lingered in her mind. What if I'm not enough? She whispered to herself. It was then that Adrian entered, his presence calm and steady as always. He had become more than just a trainer to her. He had become a friend, a confidant, someone who understood her in ways no one else did. I can see it in your eyes, he said softly. You're thinking too much. Kaylee looked up at him, frustration rising. I've fought. I've trained. But it's never enough, Adrian. I'm supposed to be more than this. I'm supposed to lead. What if I fail? Adrian took a step closer, his expression serious but understanding. You've been pushed to the edge more times than most could handle, Kelly. You've survived things others wouldn't even dare to face. You're stronger than you realize. But this, he gestured around the room, this is not about brute force. It's about belief. Believing in yourself. Kaylee clenched her fists. How can I believe in myself when everything I've ever known says I'm not enough? Adrian's voice softened. Because you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to fight for what you believe in. The rest will come. The words hit her harder than she expected. Her entire life, she had been pushed to be perfect, to be the perfect princess, the perfect warrior, the perfect heir. But maybe Adrian was right. Maybe perfection was an impossible goal. What if she simply had to be herself? Kaylee stood up, feeling the tension in her body slowly release. I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. I don't have to be perfect. I just need to be strong enough to protect my people. Adrian smiled. That's the mindset of a true leader. The next morning, Kaylee made her decision. She would no longer hide behind the expectations placed on her. She would become the warrior, the leader her people needed, not by pretending to be someone else, but by embracing who she truly was. With Adrian by her side, she began to prepare for what was to come. The whispers of the palace still echoed in her ears, but now they only fueled her fire. There was a new determination in her step. The road ahead was uncertain, but Kaylee knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the weak princess. She was ready to lead. The first test of her resolve would come soon, and she would face it head-on. Kaylee stood before the grand hall, her breath steady but her heart racing. Today was the day she would prove not just to her father, but to the entire kingdom that she was no longer the weak, frightened princess. She had spent months training, fighting, learning, and now she was ready. The hall was filled with high-ranking nobles, warriors, and ambassadors from across the galaxy. It was a spectacle, a display of strength, power, and bloodline. The challenge was simple. Kaylee was to face one of the kingdom's best fighters in a public duel. If she won, it would prove to everyone that she was fit to lead. If she lost, it would confirm the doubts they all had about her. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked across the hall, her new armor gleaming under the lights. The weight of the armor wasn't as overwhelming as it had been in the beginning. Now it felt like a part of her, a symbol of everything she had become. Adrian stood in the back, watching closely. He had trained her for this moment, pushed her further than she thought she could go. He had seen her at her weakest and watched her grow into something far more powerful than anyone had imagined. But this fight, this was her moment. Kaylee could hear the whispers behind her. She'll never win. She's not strong enough. The familiar sting of doubt crept into her chest, but she shut it out. She had learned not to listen to others' doubts. She was not the weak princess anymore. Her opponent, a towering Zetherian warrior named General Karish, stepped into the ring. His muscles bulged under his armor, his eyes cold and calculating. He was known for his strength, his brutal fighting style. Everyone knew he would win. No one had ever dared to question that. But Kaylee was different now. The gong sounded, signaling the start of the duel. General Karish advanced with lightning speed, his sword aimed directly at Kaylee's chest. She barely had time to react, but her training kicked in. She dodged to the side, her body moving fluidly, her feet light as air. Karish's blade missed by mere inches, and the crowd gasped in surprise. Kaylee didn't wait for him to recover. She moved in fast, using her speed to her advantage, striking at his exposed side. Her blade connected with his armor, but it didn't pierce. She needed more than strength. She needed strategy. Think, Kaylee. Predict. Adrian's words rang in her ears. She circled him, watching his movements carefully. He was big, strong, but predictable. Karish's attacks were powerful, but they lacked finesse. He relied too much on his physical strength, and Kaylee had learned to use that against him. She darted in again, this time aiming for his unguarded leg. She slashed quickly, her blade cutting through his armor. Karish stumbled back, cursing under his breath. For the first time, Kaylee saw fear in his eyes. But she wasn't done. She knew this was her chance. She could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins, her heart racing, but she stayed calm. She was focused. Karish lunged again, his fury now taking over. Kaylee sidestepped, just out of reach, and in one swift motion, she struck at his side once more. This time, the blow landed. The general fell to his knees, unable to fight back. Kaylee stood over him, her chest heaving with effort. The crowd was silent, staring in shock. She did it. Kaylee's eyes were fixed on General Karish as he looked up at her with a mix of respect and disbelief. She had done what no one expected. She had beaten him, not with brute force, but with intelligence and skill. As the crowd erupted into applause, Kaylee allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had proven her strength, not just as a warrior, but as a leader. The journey had been long, but now she could finally see where it would take her. She turned to face her father, King Vorax, who stood at the edge of the hall, his expression unreadable. But deep in his eyes, Kaylee saw something she hadn't seen in years: pride. This was only the beginning. The victory in the arena felt like a dream to Kaylee. She had proven herself not only to the court but to herself. The cheers of the crowd echoed in her ears as she made her way to the royal chambers, her heart still pounding from the fight. For the first time in her life, she felt like the title of warrior truly belonged to her. But that feeling of triumph was short-lived. Later that evening, as Kaylee prepared to meet her father, a shadowy figure slipped into her chambers. "You have to leave, Kaylee." The voice was low, urgent. Kaylee turned sharply, her hand instinctively going to her blade, but it was only Adrian, his face tight with worry. "What's wrong?" she asked, her heart sinking. "The situation's worse than we thought," Adrian said quickly, stepping into the room and locking the door behind him. "There's a conspiracy brewing. You're a threat to some people in this palace, people who think you're too strong for your own good." Kaylee's mind raced. "Who?" Adrian hesitated, then spoke the name that made her blood run cold. "The Council of Generals. They want to see you fail." A chill ran down her spine. The generals were the backbone of this Etherian military. They controlled the army, the fleet, the strength of the empire. If they turned against her, she'd have no power at all. Kaylee paced the room, trying to absorb the weight of Adrian's words. "But I won. I proved I'm strong enough." "It's not just about strength anymore," Adrian replied. "You're becoming a symbol of something they don't want, a new way of leading. You think they'll let you take the throne without a fight. They'll do anything to make sure that doesn't happen." Kaylee's eyes hardened. She knew the generals weren't interested in anything that threatened their grip on power, but what could she do? She had no army of her own, no allies except Adrian. She was still just the princess, still too vulnerable. As if reading her thoughts, Adrian continued, "You need to leave now. There's not much time. They'll come for you before dawn." Kaylee's mind spun. Leave? Run? For the first time, she felt the weight of the palace's cold walls closing in on her. She had fought so hard to earn her place, to prove she could lead, and now she was supposed to run. But then she remembered the fight with General Karish. She didn't run then. "No," Kaylee said firmly. "I won't run. I won't be chased from my own home." Adrian looked at her, his expression torn. "What do you mean?" Kaylee took a deep breath, a new resolve settling in her chest. "I'll face them. I will make them see that I'm not just a weak princess. I will take what's mine." Adrian shook his head. "Kelly, they're ruthless. If you challenge them without preparation." "I don't need preparation. I have what they'll never understand." Her voice was steady now, full of a confidence she hadn't known she had. "I have the will to fight." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But I'm with you, Kelly. No matter what happens." Kaylee gave him a small smile, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We'll do this together." As the night grew darker, Kaylee knew that the hardest battle of her life was just beginning. The palace that had once felt like a prison was now her battleground. And she would fight, not with the strength of a Zetherian, but with the heart of a true leader. The conspiracy had begun, but so had her war for the throne. Kelly's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the shadowy halls of the palace, her mind focused on the path ahead. The conspirators were moving in the dark, gathering their forces. The generals, those powerful figures who had always controlled the Zetherian military, were plotting her downfall. But Kaylee would not let them take what was rightfully hers. She had spent too long fighting for this moment to back down now. Adrian stood beside her, his expression grim but determined. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice low. "The generals are already gathering their troops. By sunrise, they'll be ready to strike." Kaylee nodded, her gaze hardening. "Then we make the first move." They had only a small group of loyal soldiers, those who had seen her fight and respected her strength. It was not much, but it was enough. Kaylee knew the palace would never give up without a fight, but she was ready. This was the moment she had been training for, the moment she would show everyone what she was truly capable of. The first wave of guards came in the early hours of the morning. Kaylee's heart was calm now. She had learned to move with precision, with strategy. Her hands tightened around her sword as she watched the soldiers enter the palace's outer courtyard. They were strong, but she was faster. Without a word, Kaylee signaled her soldiers to move. They spread out in perfect formation, taking cover behind pillars and arches, ready to strike when the time came. The enemy didn't know what hit them. As Kaylee and her group moved swiftly and silently, they took down the first group of soldiers with expert precision, incapacitating them before they could call for reinforcements. Kaylee's eyes scanned the battlefield, her mind already planning the next move. She had learned to trust her instincts, but this fight was different. It wasn't just about defending herself anymore. It was about taking back what was hers and proving once and for all that she was no longer the weak princess. The generals' forces were large, but their strength lay in their numbers, not their skill. Kaylee had the advantage of speed, and she used it to her benefit. She darted through the enemy lines, taking down one soldier after another, her movements fluid and controlled. Adrian was at her side, his blade flashing through the air with deadly precision. The battle raged for what felt like hours, the sounds of clashing swords and shouts filling the air. But Kaylee's determination never wavered. She had already proven her strength once before, but this time she was fighting for everything. Then, in the midst of the chaos, Kaylee spotted General Darius, one of the leaders of the conspiracy. He was standing in the center of the courtyard, his blade raised high, barking orders to his men. He hadn't seen her yet. This was her chance. With a fierce battle cry, Kaylee charged, her sword gleaming in the early morning light. She pushed through the remaining soldiers, blocking their attacks with ease. Darius finally turned to face her, his eyes narrowing in recognition. "You," he sneered. "I should have known you would be the one to cause trouble." Kaylee's eyes burned with fury. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to take what's mine." Without another word, she launched herself at him, her sword meeting his in a clash of steel. The two fought fiercely, their movements a blur of aggression and skill. Darius was strong, but Kaylee was focused. Her strikes were precise, her every movement calculated. The battle seemed endless, but with one final blow, Kaylee disarmed him, sending his sword flying from his grasp. Darius fell to the ground, defeated. Breathing heavily, Kaylee stood over him, her sword pointed at his chest. "This is my empire," she said, her voice cold and powerful, "and I will never let you take it from me." As Darius lay on the ground, Kaylee's soldiers stood tall, their loyalty unwavering. She had done it. She had won. The conspiracy had been crushed, and the kingdom had seen her true strength. Kaylee turned to Adrian, her heart still racing but filled with pride. "We did it," she said softly. Adrian nodded, his face filled with respect. "You didn't just win a battle, Kaylee. You won their respect." Kaylee looked over the battlefield, the weight of what she had just accomplished sinking in. She was no longer just the princess. She was the warrior who had fought for her future. And now she was ready to take her place as the true leader of the Cytherian Empire. The palace was eerily quiet after the battle. The once loud halls now filled only with the quiet sounds of footsteps and hushed conversations. Kaylee stood on the balcony, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The weight of the last few hours settled over her. She had fought and won, but the real test was yet to come, gaining the trust of her people. She had shown them her strength in battle, but that alone wouldn't be enough. She had to prove herself as a leader, a ruler they could rely on. Adrian approached from behind, his footsteps soft. He had stayed by her side throughout everything, guiding her through the worst of times and helping her find the strength she hadn't known she had. "You did well today," he said, his voice calm but filled with pride. Kaylee turned to him, her expression softening. "We did well. I couldn't have done it without you." Adrian shook his head slightly. "It was always in you, Kaylee. I just helped you see it." Kaylee smiled, though there was a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. "It doesn't feel like enough." "It's more than enough," Adrian assured her. "You proved your strength, your mind, and your heart today. The people saw that. They'll follow you." But Kaylee wasn't so sure. She knew the battle was only the beginning. There were still those in the palace, still old traditions, that wouldn't accept her. Cytherian society had always been about power, about survival of the fittest. They wouldn't easily accept a new way of thinking, especially not one that had been shaped by a human. "I don't know," she said quietly, her gaze drifting back to the view outside. "I'm not sure if they'll see me the way you do." Adrian stood beside her, silent for a moment. "It's not about what they see, Kaylee. It's about what you see in yourself. They'll follow you because they'll realize that you're the one who can lead them forward, not because you're perfect, but because you're real." Kaylee took a deep breath, his words sinking in. Maybe it was time to trust herself, to let go of the fears that had held her back for so long. She wasn't the princess she used to be, the one who was afraid of every challenge. She was something different now, something stronger. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "You've given me more than I could ever repay." Adrian smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "You don't owe me anything, Kaylee. Just keep moving forward. That's all anyone can ask for." Kaylee stood there for a moment, her thoughts swirling. The city below her was still waking up, the sun rising over the horizon, a new day dawning. A new era was beginning, not just for her, but for all the Cytherians. She was no longer just a princess, she was their future. As the days passed, Kaylee worked hard to gain the trust of her people. She took part in council meetings, listening carefully to the voices of the generals who had once been her enemies. Slowly, she began to earn their respect. They had seen her fight, seen her strength, but now they were starting to see her as a leader, someone who could think ahead, adapt, and change the future of their empire. She had proven herself in battle, but now the real work began, creating the future she believed in. And through it all, Adrian was there, by her side, supporting her, pushing her forward when she faltered, and reminding her that her heart was the true strength that would guide them all. Kaylee had come a long way from the weak princess who had once doubted herself. She had been shaped by battle, by loss, and by the power of those who believed in her. And now she would shape the future, not just as the ruler of the Cytherian Empire, but as a warrior who had found her true path, and the strength to lead it. The grand hall was filled with nobles, warriors, and foreign dignitaries. The air was thick with anticipation. Today was the day Kaylee would formally take the throne as the ruler of the Cytherian Empire. The battle had been fought, the conspirators vanquished. But now, the true test awaited her. She had to prove to the galaxy that she was not just a warrior, but a ruler who could unite, lead, and build a new future for her people. Kaylee stood at the top of the steps, looking out over the room below. She had spent her whole life being told what she should be, who she should become. The weak princess who had always been in the shadow of her father's legacy was gone. In her place stood the warrior who had earned her place through blood, sweat, and resilience. Adrian stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of expectations. He had always believed in her, even when she hadn't believed in herself. "You've come so far," Adrian said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. Kaylee nodded, the weight of the moment settling over her. "It doesn't feel real yet. I fought so hard to get here, but now it's all about leading. Leading them. Leading us." Adrian gave her a reassuring smile. "You're ready. You've been ready all along." She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The room grew silent, the eyes of everyone in the hall focused on her. As she walked to the throne, her footsteps echoed in the stillness, each step marking her journey. At the throne, she paused, looking at the symbol of power, her father's throne. It was imposing, massive, a symbol of everything she had fought against in her life. But now it was hers. She wasn't taking the throne because she was born into it. She was claiming it because she had earned it. Kaylee sat, her posture strong, but there was a calm in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The room held its breath as she addressed the people of the Empire for the first time as their queen. "The time for change has come." Her voice rang out, clear and firm. "Cytheria is no longer ruled by force alone. We will be ruled by wisdom, courage, and unity. No longer will strength be measured by how much you can crush your enemies. We will measure our strength by how much we can build, how much we can grow, and how much we can care for one another." The crowd was still, taking in her words. Some were skeptical, others uncertain, but Kaylee knew that this was the only path forward. She had seen the old ways, had fought against them, and now she was ready to forge a new way for her people. Her father, King Vorax, stood at the back of the hall, his expression unreadable. He had once doubted her, had once seen her as weak and unworthy. But now, as he watched her take the throne, he saw something different. Pride. He couldn't deny it. She had become everything he had never expected. And in doing so, she had become everything Cytheria needed. Kaylee looked out at the faces before her, the ones who would follow her. "This empire will grow stronger not through violence, but through understanding. Together, we will lead Cytheria into a future where we all stand as equals." The room erupted into applause, loud and thunderous. Kaylee could feel the shift in the air, the energy in the room. She had done it. She had proven herself, not just as a warrior, but as a leader who would change the course of her people's history. As the applause continued, Kaylee glanced over at Adrian, her heart swelling with gratitude. She couldn't have done this without him. He had been her guide, her strength, her friend. And now, as she took her place at the head of the Cytherian Empire, she knew this was only the beginning. The legacy she would leave behind would not be one of war and conquest. It would be one of strength through unity. And with Adrian by her side, she knew there was no challenge too great to overcome.